Welcome to Potty! April of F 2026. Alright, so Google just made a move that's got the cybersecurity world talking. They've shortened their timeline for migrating to post-quantum cryptography, and they're now targeting 2029 to have their systems secured against quantum computers. Now, this might sound like technical inside baseball, but trust me, this is actually a pretty big deal. We're talking about the fundamental way that all of our digital communications, banking, and basically everything secure on the internet gets protected. And Google just said they need to be ready a year earlier than the industry standard. So today we're going to dig into what this really means, why Google might be accelerating this timeline, and what it tells us about where quantum computing is headed. So let's start with what we actually know here. Multiple headlines are framing this as Google shortening their timeline for quantum-safe encryption transition, with that 2029 target date. Now, here's what's interesting. Prior to this announcement, Google didn't officially pinpoint a date for this transition. They were basically aligned with the NIST standards, which generally assess the timeline at around 2030. So, they're moving this up by about a year. And when I see a company like Google accelerating a timeline like this, especially for something as fundamental as encryption, that tells me they're seeing something in their internal data or research that's making them think, okay, we need to move faster on this. Now, let me explain why this matters. Because quantum computers and encryption might sound abstract, but this stuff affects everyone. Right now, all of our secure communications. When you do online banking, when you send a private message, when you make an online purchase, all of that is protected by encryption methods that would take classical computers basically forever to crack. We're talking about mathematical problems that would take longer than the age of the universe to solve. But quantum computers, if they get sufficiently powerful, could potentially break these encryption methods that protect financial transactions, communications, and identity systems. It's not like they'd be a little bit faster. They'd make current encryption completely useless, almost instantly. And this is where the term Q-Day comes in. That's the hypothetical day when quantum computers become powerful enough to break current encryption standards. Some headlines are framing this as Google getting ready for Q-Day by 2029. Now, my read on this is that Google isn't necessarily saying Q-Day is definitely happening in 2029, but they want to be protected before it potentially could happen. It's like installing a security system before you think burglars might show up in your neighborhood, not after. The smart move is to be ready early, especially when the consequences of being late are so catastrophic. But here's the thing that's really fascinating about this timeline shift, and this is where I think Google's internal intelligence might be showing. Some of the coverage suggests that this shift indicates Google might be worried that 2035 would be too late to protect their systems and data for the quantum age. Now, I want to be careful here because that's interpretation from the sources, not necessarily Google's stated reasoning. But if that interpretation is accurate, it raises some really interesting questions. Like, what is Google seeing in quantum computing development that's making them think they need to move faster? Are they seeing progress in quantum computing that suggests these machines might be more powerful sooner than the general timeline suggests? Now, let's talk about what this migration actually involves, because it's not like flipping a switch. Migration to post-quantum cryptography is expected to be incredibly complex. We're talking about updates to legacy systems, extensive interoperability testing, and long-term planning for what they call cryptographic agility. Basically, you need to rebuild the security infrastructure of the entire internet, and you need to do it in a way that doesn't break anything that currently exists. It's like replacing the foundation of a house while people are still living in it. And Google saying they want to do this by 2029 means they're committing to a massive, expensive, technically challenging project with a pretty aggressive timeline. What's also interesting here is the regulatory context. We've got CNSA 2.0 requiring quantum-safe algorithms for national security systems by January 2027. The EU has a 21-state joint statement targeting post-quantum cryptography transition of sensitive systems by 2030. And there's OMBM 2302 mandating annual cryptographic inventories. So there's definitely regulatory pressure building around this stuff. But Google moving to 2029 puts them ahead of most of these regulatory timelines. That suggests to me that this isn't just about compliance. This is about Google making a strategic bet that they need to be protected earlier than what regulations require. Now, some headlines are suggesting that Google's updated timeline adds pressure on governments and enterprises to accelerate their own quantum readiness plans. And honestly, that makes sense to me. When a company like Google, with their resources, their quantum computing research, their visibility into the cutting edge of technology, when they say we need to move faster on this, other organizations are going to pay attention. It's like when the most prepared person in your disaster preparedness group suddenly starts stockpiling more emergency supplies. You might not know exactly what they're seeing, but you probably want to follow their lead. But here's what I think is the real story underneath all of this. Google has some of the most advanced quantum computing research in the world. They've got teams working on quantum supremacy. They understand the technical challenges and the timelines better than almost anyone. So when they move up their protection timeline, that's not just a business decision. That's potentially an intelligence signal about where quantum computing is headed. My take is that Google is seeing progress in quantum computing, either in their own labs or in the broader research community, that's making them think, okay, we need to be protected sooner rather than later. And you know what's wild about this whole situation? We're basically in this weird race where the same companies that are developing quantum computers are also the ones that need to protect against quantum computers. Google is simultaneously trying to build more powerful quantum machines and trying to protect their systems against quantum machines. It's like they're playing both sides of this technological arms race. And the fact that they're accelerating their defensive timeline suggests they might be seeing something promising on the offensive side, meaning their quantum computing research might be progressing faster than expected. Now, let's be realistic about what this means for regular people in the short term. You're probably not going to notice anything different in 2029 when Google completes this migration. If they do it right, all your apps and services will work exactly the same way they do now. The whole point of good cryptography is that it's invisible to end users. But in the long term, this could be the difference between living in a world where your digital privacy and security remains intact versus living in a world where quantum computers have basically broken the internet as we know it. So yeah, it's invisible work, but it might be some of the most important invisible work happening in tech right now. What I find really interesting is the competitive implications here. If Google successfully migrates to quantum-safe encryption by 2029 and other major tech companies don't, Google could have a significant security advantage. Imagine a world where quantum computers exist and can break traditional encryption, but Google's systems are protected and their competitors aren't. That would be a massive competitive moat. So this timeline acceleration might not just be about protection. It might be about positioning Google to be the most secure major platform in a post-quantum world. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night thinking about this stuff. We don't really know how close we are to practical quantum computers that can break encryption. The quantum computing field is notorious for overpromising and under-delivering on timelines. We've been hearing that quantum computers are just around the corner for like 20 years now. But then again, we've also seen some pretty significant breakthroughs recently. And Google, with their Sycamore processor and their quantum supremacy claims, they're at the forefront of this research. So if anyone has a realistic sense of the timeline, it's probably them. My practical takeaway from all this is pretty straightforward. If you're running any kind of organization that handles sensitive data, you should probably start paying attention to post-quantum cryptography migration planning. You don't need to panic, but you also shouldn't assume that this is someone else's problem. The migration to quantum-safe encryption is going to be complex and time-consuming, and if Google thinks they need to be done by 2029, you probably want to start thinking about your own timeline. And honestly, even if you're just a regular person, this is worth understanding because it's going to affect the security of everything digital in your life. So that's the story. Google is accelerating their quantum-safe encryption timeline to 2029, a year ahead of industry standards. Whether this is driven by internal quantum computing breakthroughs, competitive positioning, or just really good risk management, it's a signal that the quantum future might be arriving faster than we expected. If you want to dig deeper into this, I'd recommend looking up NIST's post-quantum cryptography standards, checking out Google's own quantum computing research updates, and maybe reading up on what cryptographic agility actually means in practice. Because ready or not, the quantum age is coming, and companies like Google are already preparing for it.